Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I am here today at the Rock Island Auction Company, taking a look at some of the guns that they're going to be selling in their upcoming April of 2016 premiere auction. And the one I have today in front of me here is a very interesting and unusual Czech prototype semi-auto rifle. This dates from 1929, and around this time period, the 1920s and the early 1930s, a lot of different countries were doing a lot of experimentation with self-loading rifle possibilities. So we know the US was doing it, and that of course developed into the M1 Garand. The French had a large development program. The Germans had a semi-auto rifle development program, although maybe not quite as significant as some of the other countries. But the Japanese had one, the Russians had one. Pretty much everybody was looking at replacing their bolt-action rifles with semi-autos. Now, very few countries would actually manage to do this before World War II, but everyone was experimenting with it. And in Czechoslovakia, there was a very significant and very high-quality arms industry that was doing a lot of this. In fact, in Czechoslovakia, a lot of this work was done both for the Czech army and also for potential export. So they had a lot of motive to get some sort of cool, good rifle that they could sell to a lot of people. I only found one good source discussing this rifle, and the information I've been able to find is that this was designated a Model S, but it developed from a Model HB rifle. And in 1927, the Model HB was tested in Prague against a Model K. Now, the HB was developed by two guys, Holek and Beneš. Holek is one of the brothers in a pretty famous Czech arms development family. Emanuel Holek and Václav Holek, and there was a third brother whose name escapes me at the moment. But they are the ones who are responsible for example, the ZH-29 semi-auto rifle. In fact, the guy who developed the ZH-29 is the same guy who was a partner in developing this rifle. What's interesting, though, is he did this for the CZ factory, and between when this was developed and when it was actually tested, he left CZ and went to work for Brno. So I believe that's why they renamed this to the Model S, was to get his name off of it, because now he was working for their direct competition. So instead, they named it for a city that it had originated in, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. At any rate, 1927, this was tested against a Model K. The K was a rifle developed by Karl Kernka, who was another fairly significant early arms designer that most people haven't heard of. He really doesn't have much notoriety, but he was involved in a lot of early self-loading pistols as well as rifles. The result of this trial was that 10 examples of each gun were ordered, and that took some time to make, and so there was going to be a follow-up trial in 1928. By that time, of course, Holek had left, and you now had the Model S against the Model K. This rifle is a gas-operated tilting bolt rifle. The Kernka Model K was a recoil-operated rifle, and both of these guns had some fairly substantial problems, but the recoil-operated Model K had a lot of problems. And this was deemed significantly better. So they went back and improved it, and this is the slightly improved model that was again trialed in 1929. And it was tested, interestingly, in 1929, it was actually tested against the ZH-29 rifle made by Brno. And the ZH-29, of course, was developed by the same guy as this. The ZH-29 is also a gas-operated tilting bolt rifle, the same basic mechanism or the same fundamental type of mechanism as this. This, however, has a gas piston under the barrel, and the bolt tilts upward. The ZH-29 has a rather unusual side tilting bolt. I have a previous video on the ZH-29. If you're interested in that rifle, you should check out that video. At any rate, this rifle still had some operational problems. It would undergo further development, and eventually it would turn into the CZ model of 35, and ultimately went nowhere. Like in many countries, this rifle development, while promising, they were always expensive guns, and they often ended up having reliability issues compared to what the militaries were used to, which are bolt-action Mausers most of the time, which are very reliable guns. So between the potentially sketchy new technology and then the vastly higher cost of self-loading rifles over bolt-action, very few countries ended up adopting these rifles before World War II. Really, the US and Russia are the only two that really managed to. All right, a basic overview of the controls. Trigger, obviously. Our safety is located here on the side. Pulling it back is safe. You saw how that moved the trigger and locked it in place. Forward is fire. Our magazine release, this is a nose-in rock-back magazine. Goes very deep into the receiver, actually. It's a standard 10-round magazine, and the majority of these Czech rifles used basically the same type of magazine. This would go on to be used in the ZH-29, which did have some significant international sales. The same style of magazine was also used in the ZB-26 light machine guns, which were exceedingly popular and developed into things, including, among others, the Bren gun. This is 8mm Mauser. It does lock open on an empty magazine. And interestingly, this is one of those early guns where there is no bolt release lever. Instead, when the rifle is locked open, in fact, I can just show you, the charging handle is non-reciprocating, and to drop the bolt, you pull the trigger. So I'm holding onto it with the handle so it doesn't slam, but the bolt release is actually the trigger. The second time you pull the trigger, the rifle fires. That was a feature that it was also actually in the ZH-29 and a handful of other semi-auto rifles contemporary to this. Really, the only markings on this gun are here on the middle point of the receiver. We have the CZ factory spelled out and its location in Praza. And then this is a Czech military acceptance mark indicating that this probably was a rifle actually used in trials. It wasn't, for example, a spare that was built and never used. And that's a 1929 date on it. And then the one other thing we have is up just behind the rear sight. We have serial number, which is 5 on this particular rifle. The opposite side of the action here, the left side, has really nothing going on. It does have a sling swivel right on the wrist. In fact, this rifle has 2 sets of sling swivels, one on the side for cavalry use and one on the bottom for infantry use. Now, you may have noticed this big lug on the back. That's something that could be easily misunderstood as a safety. However, this is actually the disassembly lever for the rifle. So what we do is rotate it to this side, and then the rifle hinges open right at this point. So you kind of get a clue that that's going to happen when you look at the stock and you see this big slot cut out in the stock. But that opens up. That gives us access to the trigger assembly, and we can pull all of the internals out of the receiver. So let's go ahead and do that. That's a very simple process. I'm going to use the bolt handle to pull them back, and then let's just reach in there, push this out. There we have the op rod, bolt carrier, and bolt. That's all of the internals right there. So let's take a closer look at this. Our bolt is of the tilting design. So we've got a pair of cammed tracks here, lifts the bolt up when it's fully forward and in battery. When the bolt carrier pushes backwards, those cams pull the back of the bolt downward, unlock it, and allow it to travel. So our locking shoulder is this surface right here. Firing pin is behind it. And this just slides right out the back of the bolt carrier for disassembly. Looks very much like, for example, a Bren gun bolt, because this was designed by the same factory and some of the same people. There's that. Another clever element to this gun is the recoil spring. We have the spring here with a guide rod, and it's running inside the gas piston, and it is captive, so I can pull it out like this. But I can take, as you saw, I can take the whole bolt carrier assembly out with the gas piston still in place, which is really cool because this is an uncaptive spring like this is kind of a pain in the butt to put back in. So it's nice that you can leave it assembled. The way this specifically works is we have this pair of rails in the op rod assembly, and our spring guide rod runs in those rails. It's captive at the back. You pull it forward to here and you can lift it out. Another cool feature here is that this sheet metal cover, which protects the gas block right here and the base of the gas piston, this cover comes off forward, and it is actually held locked in place by this sling swivel. You can see there are two flat surfaces on the sling swivel here. In order to disassemble, what I do is rotate this all the way forward and then rotate it 90 degrees that way. And then this is actually a keyed component that comes out, and this is what locks this sheet metal cover in place. Now, this is really tight in place, and there's not actually all that much functional stuff under here to show you. All we actually have is a gas port and the base of the gas block where this piston sits at rest. So I'm not going to try and pull this off because it looks like it kind of takes a hammer and punch, and I don't want to deal with that. So, but this keyed sling swivel is a very cool idea for keeping it in place. Because it's got these two flats on it, once it's in place, as long as it is like this or pulled back, it can't rotate out of position, which means if you're actually using it with a sling, there's no way that you will accidentally pull this out and have your gas system cover fall off. This does have a standard style bayonet lug, and it's interesting to look at this muzzle cover, which is pretty typical of Mauser rifles of the time that would have also come out of Czechoslovakia. So we can take a look at the fire control mechanism in here. This is hammer fired, and the hammer goes back down. The mechanism itself is a very close mechanical copy of the system in the French model of 1917 RSC rifle, which kind of was, this fire control hammer mechanism goes quite a ways back. The RSC kind of sort of copied it from the Remington Model 8. It was originally probably attributable to John Moses Browning. It is best known today for probably from the M1 Garand, which also used a very similar system. You know, once people figure out a nice, efficient, easy trigger mechanism like this, and any patents on it have expired, there's no reason that everyone isn't just going to go ahead and use it. And that's the case here. One last cool feature that I want to point out is, of course, this whole bolt carrier assembly can be removed with the recoil spring still captive in place. And you can see when I've got the rifle open, there's no spring tension on the bolt. It just moves, you know, the spring's not connected to anything. However, as soon as you close, put the bolt all the way in battery, and then when you close the action, now it's immediately under tension. And there's a really slick little way that that's done. So this block at the front of the receiver here, the front of the lower assembly, serves a couple of different purposes. It is actually the nose catch for the magazine. So when the magazine's in place, it locks into the back there. And then this is also the surface that our recoil spring, right here, sits in a little detent in the front of this block. So that block is what provides the resistance for the recoil spring to now have spring tension as soon as the rifle, the two halves of the rifle are closed up. That's a pretty slick, pretty simple and clever idea right there. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. You know, these prototype rifles like this are really just a goldmine of interesting and creative features for self-loading rifles, stuff that we pretty quickly figured out what did and didn't work, and so you don't see a lot of these sort of features on modern guns. At any rate, this one is, of course, coming up for sale. If you'd like to own it yourself, take a look at the description text below. You'll find there a link to Rock Island's catalog page on this rifle. You can look at their pictures and description, and if you decide that you just really can't live without it, you can place a bid right there on the website, or you can come up here to Rock Island and participate live in the auction. Thanks for watching.